The soldier declared dead who returned to his family 7 years later in 1921 Normandy. It arrived on a cold, gray morning. The kind of morning where the wind whispers through empty streets and the mist clings to every corner of Normandy. A letter, stamped with official seals, carried the words no family ever wants to read. Their son, husband, and father was dead. Marie, his wife, held the envelope with trembling hands. The paper felt heavier than lead. Inside, the letter explained that he had been lost in battle 7 years earlier. There were no details, only a brief note confirming what her heart had feared since the day he left. Her knees buckled, and the room seemed to spin around her. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the cobbled streets of her village. Their children, young and unaware, sensed the shift in the air. The silence at breakfast was deafening. No laughter, no playful chatter, only the rustle of paper and the muted sobs of their mother. Marie could barely speak. She couldn't tell them. Not yet. How do you explain that the person who tucked you in at night, who kissed your forehead, was gone forever? How do you explain a void that feels infinite? Words spread through the village like a storm. Neighbors came, bringing bread, soup, and sorrow. They spoke in hushed tones, each gesture heavy with sympathy, but no one could lift the weight of her grief. Marie wandered the house in a daze, touching the empty chair where he had once sat, smelling the lingering scent of his coat. Each memory was a dagger, a cruel reminder of what she had lost. The letter itself became an object of obsession. She read it over and over, tracing the ink with trembling fingers, as if doing so could reverse the words, could bring him back. Her mind clung to every detail, the official seal, the neat handwriting, the impossibility of it all. 7 years had passed, but in an instant, everything changed. His absence became a presence in every room. In the evenings, she would sit by the window, staring at the horizon where the sun dipped behind distant hills. She imagined him walking through the fog, coming home, and yet the letter told her it was impossible. The war had taken him. Normandy had claimed him. And still, a tiny, stubborn part of her refused to let go. The villagers organized a small memorial. Candles flickered in the wind, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. His name was called aloud, and the town mourned as one. Children placed flowers, elders bowed their heads, and Marie stood, a pillar of quiet despair. Every face in the crowd mirrored her pain, yet none could feel the depth of the emptiness inside her. Night fell, and the house was silent except for the soft creak of the floorboards and the whispering wind. She held her children close, rocking them as if the act itself could shield them from the cruel reality. 7 years of waiting, 7 years of letters that never arrived, culminated in this single, devastating moment. And yet, in the back of her mind, a fragile ember of doubt lingered. Could it truly be him? Could the war have swallowed him whole, only to return him someday? Marie dared not hope. Hope, she had learned, was a dangerous thing. But the world has a way of twisting the impossible into reality. What she did not know, what no one in the village could know, was that the story of her husband was far from over. 7 years lost. One letter that shattered everything. And a secret the war had kept hidden, waiting for the day it would reveal itself. The morning of the funeral was cloaked in mist, the kind of fog that seeps into bones and blurs the edges of reality. Villagers shuffled along the narrow cobblestone streets, their heads bowed, coats pulled tight against the damp chill. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the very air mourned alongside them. A small wooden coffin rested at the front of the church, covered in pale flowers. Marie's hands were clenched so tightly around the bouquet that her knuckles turned white. Her eyes, hollow and red-rimmed, did not leave the box. Every heartbeat echoed like a drum in the empty silence of the church. The priest's voice trembled, reading the rites, but even his words felt powerless against the magnitude of her loss. Children whispered among themselves, trying to understand. 7 years had passed, yet the shadow of absence had become all they knew. They had grown up without him, learning to navigate a life built on the void he left behind. The funeral brought that void into sharp focus, a reminder of what could never be replaced. Neighbors pressed close, some offering silent condolences, others hiding tears behind stiff collars. The fog outside pressed against the stained glass windows, diffusing the weak sunlight into a gray haze. Every face seemed to melt into the mist, as if reality itself wavered under the weight of grief. Marie's gaze wandered over the small crowd. There were friends who had watched her weep silently at the market, children who had helped her gather firewood in the freezing winters, and distant relatives who had traveled for the occasion. All of them shared the same unspoken truth. A life had ended too soon, a soldier stolen by a war that refused to surrender him. The moment came to lower the coffin into the freshly dug grave. The sound of earth hitting would reverberated like a cruel percussion, each thud a reminder that he was gone. Marie could barely breathe, her hands gripping the edges of her coat as if it were a lifeline. She imagined his face, sunburned and smiling, and then tried to push the vision away. Memories became both a comfort and a torment, filling the hollow spaces in her chest with longing. The villagers took turns placing flowers atop the coffin. Each bloom was a fragile emblem of love and memory, wilting under the cold weight of the fog. The children, sensing the ritual's gravity, stayed close to their mother. She whispered their father's name, her voice barely audible, a tremor in the gray silence. As the last shovelful of dirt fell, a wind swept through the graveyard. It stirred the fog, curling it around the headstones like restless spirits. Marie shivered, not entirely from the cold. The sensation of absence pressed against her, heavy and unrelenting. She wanted to scream, to demand that the world reverse its cruel decree, but the rules of death were absolute. At least, that's what everyone believed. The funeral ended, but the silence lingered. Villagers drifted away slowly, their footsteps muffled by the fog, leaving Marie alone at the edge of the grave. She knelt, placing a hand on the damp earth, and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, that she would endure, that she would raise their children, that she would remember him every day of her life. Yet beneath the grief, an unexplainable unease lingered. A small, stubborn flicker of disbelief refused to die. Something didn't feel right. How could a man who had survived battles, harsh winters, and the cruelty of war vanish so completely? A question hung in the mist, unanswered, lingering like smoke over the cemetery. And in that moment, no one knew the truth. The war had not claimed him entirely. Somewhere, hidden from the eyes of the world, his story was far from over. The days that followed were hollow, each one stretching endlessly like a gray ribbon of sorrow. Marie moved through the house as if in a dream. The walls, once filled with laughter, now echoed only with the quiet tick of a clock and the soft rustle of curtains in the wind. Every corner held a memory of him, a coat draped over a chair, a pair of boots by the door, the faint scent of tobacco that lingered in the study. Raising their children alone was a challenge she had never imagined. Each morning she forced herself out of bed, preparing meals for little mouths that demanded attention and love. They needed their father in ways she could never fully replace. Their questions, innocent but piercing, reminded her daily of the absence that could not be filled. "When will Papa come home?" they would ask, eyes wide with hope. Marie would smile through the ache in her chest, forcing words she didn't believe herself. "He's in a better place." The villagers watched her struggle, offering help in small ways, bread, firewood, or a sympathetic smile. Yet, even surrounded by community, the loneliness was absolute. She spoke with no one of her true thoughts, the small spark of hope that refused to die. There was a part of her that believed, against all reason, that he might still walk through the door. The other part warned her that hope was a dangerous, cruel thing. Life moved on reluctantly. The seasons changed, the sun rose and fell, and the children grew taller, their laughter sometimes piercing through her grief like shards of sunlight. Yet each joy was tempered by the shadow of his absence. Birthdays, holidays, quiet evenings by the fire. Every celebration was a reminder that he was not there to share them. She became skilled at wearing a mask of strength, hiding the emptiness that clawed at her from within. Evenings were the hardest. The house felt colder after the children were asleep, the silence almost unbearable. She would sit by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames, imagining him returning from the war, dirty and tired, yet smiling as he stepped through the door. She would whisper his name into the darkness, willing him to answer, willing the world to rewrite itself. But no answer came. Only the shadows danced along the walls, mocking her longing. Neighbors began to speak in hushed tones about her resilience. Some called her brave, others pitied her. But no one could truly understand what it meant to live in the space between grief and hope. She had become a ghost herself, moving through the world with eyes wide open, yet heart constantly tethered to a memory. She kept his belongings untouched, as if preserving them might preserve him. His jacket hung by the door, his boots neatly placed beneath it, and in the study his papers were stacked exactly as he had left them. Every time she touched a letter or a coat, a flicker of life seemed to spark in her chest, only to vanish as quickly as it came. In those 7 long years, Marie learned the quiet endurance of sorrow. She became fiercely protective of the small joys she could still hold on to. The smiles of her children, the warmth of a sunbeam on a chilly morning, the laughter of a neighbor's child across the street. Life without him was harsh and unrelenting, yet it demanded perseverance. And yet, despite the grinding reality of loss, a question lingered in the back of her mind, whispering in the stillness of night. What if the war had not claimed him entirely? What if he was still out there, waiting, lost to the world but not to her? She dared not speak it aloud, but in her heart, a fragile ember refused to die. The house remained quiet, the fog pressed against the windows, and life continued in an uneasy rhythm of hope and despair. Marie's world had been reshaped by grief, but the story of the soldier was far from over. Somewhere, beyond the horizon of pain, the impossible waited to return. Somewhere far from the quiet streets of Normandy, the soldier's life had taken a turn no one could have imagined. Captured during a brutal skirmish, he had been taken to a remote prisoner of war camp. The world he had left behind faded into memory, replaced by the gray walls, barbed wire, and the endless monotony of survival. Each day bled into the next, marked only by the routine of hunger, cold, and the harsh glare of guards. At first, he had tried to escape, fueled by anger and desperation. Each failed attempt left him weaker, bruised, and more certain that the world had forgotten him. Letters he had written, pleas to friends, messages to family, had been intercepted or lost in the chaos of war. 7 years stretched like an eternity, the calendar meaningless in a place where time itself seemed imprisoned. He survived by sheer instinct, learning to navigate the small freedoms the guards allowed. A scrape of bread here, a whispered conversation there. Every tiny victory was a lifeline, a fragile reminder that he was still alive. Nights were the hardest, when silence pressed against the walls and the cold crept under his thin blanket. He would close his eyes and imagine Normandy, the smell of the bakery in the morning, the laughter of his children, the warmth of Marie's hand in his. Those memories kept him from despair. Rumors of the war's end reached the camp sporadically, carried by whispers or scraps of newspaper. Hope surged, only to be extinguished again when reality struck. The war had ended, but he remained trapped, forgotten by the world beyond the wire. Every day, he counted the years, imagining the life that continued without him. He wondered if his family had moved on, if they had rebuilt what he had lost, if they even still thought of him. The harshness of the camp changed him. He became quieter, observing, listening, waiting. Trust was dangerous, attachment even more so. Some prisoners clung to memories, others to despair. He clung to both, forging a fragile inner world that no one could touch. And yet, in the deepest recesses of his mind, a single thought persisted. He would return. He had to. No matter the obstacles, no matter the years stolen, he would find his way home. The world outside shifted without him. Europe rebuilt, towns healed, families mourned and moved forward. And through it all, he survived, a shadow moving unseen, a man declared dead but very much alive. He became a master of endurance, learning the language of silence and patience, understanding that survival was as much about the mind as the body. Then came the day he finally slipped past the barbed wire, evading guards and patrols with the skill born of 7 years of confinement. He walked through forests, along rivers, and across fields, each step taking him closer to Normandy. Every mile was etched into his muscles, every night a test of willpower. Hunger and exhaustion threatened to break him, but the thought of Marie, of his children, of the home he had lost, pushed him forward. By the time he neared the village, he was no longer the same man who had left. His face bore the marks of hardship, his hands were scarred, and his body moved with cautious precision. Yet the fire in his eyes had not dimmed. He carried with him the weight of 7 years, the silence, the suffering, the impossibility of hope. And he carried something else, too, an unbreakable determination to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. The war had not let go. It had tried to erase him, to fold him into history as a casualty, another forgotten name. But he had endured, and the world would soon be forced to reckon with the impossible. The soldier who was declared dead was walking back into the lives that had mourned him, and nothing would ever be the same. Back in Normandy, life had carried on with a hollow rhythm. Marie tended her home, raised the children, and carried the weight of a loss that had no end. Yet, beneath the heavy layers of grief, faint whispers began to stir. Rumors, small and fragmented, drifted through the village like mist. Impossible tales of a man spotted in distant towns, a soldier wandering the countryside, or a familiar voice heard on the wind. At first, Marie dismissed them. They were the kind of stories that clung to a grieving heart, teasing it with false hope. But the whispers persisted. A stranger visiting the market asked after a soldier who looked remarkably like her husband. A neighbor swore they had seen him walking along the edge of a nearby forest, stooped and weary, yet unmistakable. The villagers whispered in hushed tones, half in fear of hope, half in disbelief that the impossible could be true. Marie's nights became restless. Every sound outside, the creak of the gate, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, sent her heart racing. Was it him? Could he have truly survived, wandering the unknown for 7 years? She did not speak of these thoughts, not even to herself. Hope was dangerous. It had betrayed her once, leading her through years of grief and longing. Yet the ember refused to die. The children sensed it too. They would look toward the horizon, squinting into the distance, as if the fog might part to reveal their father standing there. They asked questions they had long stopped asking, their young voices trembling with the possibility of miracles. Marie's heart clenched, torn between protecting them from disappointment and nurturing the fragile spark that refused to die. Then came the day when a letter arrived, tattered, faded, almost lost to time. It bore no return address, only a hastily scrawled note. I am alive. I will find you. Marie's hand shook so violently she could barely hold the paper. Tears blurred her vision as she pressed it to her chest, her mind racing with fear, disbelief, and a hope so sharp it hurt. 7 years of absence, 7 years of sorrow, condensed into 3 simple words that threatened to unravel everything she had built in his absence. The villagers were divided. Some whispered warnings, insisting she must be careful, that hope would crush her again. Others clung to the possibility, offering subtle encouragement and sharing stories of other lost soldiers who had returned from war. The air in the village buzzed with tension, a collective holding of breath. Could the impossible be true? Could the man they had mourned for so long truly walk among them again? Marie began to prepare herself, quietly, for the unimaginable. She could not tell the children, not yet. The letter was proof, yes, but proof alone did not undo 7 years of grief. She spoke to herself in whispers late at night, rehearsing what she might say, what she might do when the impossible became reality. Every day, she watched the horizon more closely, scanning the fog for the outline of a figure, the shape of a man who belonged to her. The village became a place of tension and anticipation. Footsteps on the cobblestones made hearts leap. Shadows that moved in the mist carried the weight of possibility. Every small sound was amplified, every unexpected visitor examined with cautious hope. And all the while, somewhere beyond the fields and forests, he was walking, every step deliberate, every moment bringing him closer to the life that had survived without him. The whispers of hope were not just illusions. They were the prelude to a miracle, a story waiting to culminate in the impossible reunion of a soldier and the family that had never stopped waiting. 7 years of absence, one letter, and a world holding its breath for the impossible to return. By 1921, the village of Normandy had grown used to shadows of the past. People whispered of soldiers returning from the dead, of figures glimpsed in foggy fields, and of familiar voices carried by the wind. Some called it superstition, others called it hope. But everyone agreed on one thing. Something strange was stirring, something the mind struggled to comprehend. It started with small sightings. A figure, tall and stooped, wandering near the edge of the river. A man whose face seemed familiar, but vanished before anyone could approach. Children claimed to see him watching from the trees, his eyes full of sorrow and longing. These fleeting glimpses sparked stories at the market, in the bakery, and at the chapel, growing with each retelling. The town had long lived in the aftermath of war. The line between life and death, fact and fantasy, was already blurred. Marie tried to ignore the murmurs. She had learned the cruelty of hope and the weight of disappointment. Yet, deep down, she could not dismiss them entirely. Something in her chest stirred whenever she heard someone speak of the wandering soldier. Her mind raced with impossible questions. Could it really be him? Could the war have failed to erase him completely? The villagers, however, began to take sides. Some were fearful, convinced that the town was being haunted by the ghosts of war. They avoided the foggy fields, muttering prayers as they passed. Others were eager, fueled by the chance to witness a miracle, hanging on every rumor and whisper. The tension in the town grew, a quiet electricity that hummed through narrow streets and empty houses. One evening, as the fog rolled in thicker than ever, a few brave villagers followed a shadow that moved along the forest edge. Hearts pounding, they crept closer, their breaths visible in the cold air. And for a moment, they thought they had glimpsed a ghost, a figure bent and weary, yet unmistakably human. Then, as if aware of being watched, he vanished into the mist. Panic, fear, and wonder mixed in their hearts, leaving them both terrified and awestruck. Meanwhile, Marie's children began to speak of their father in hushed tones, convinced that he was near. "I saw him in the fog today," her eldest whispered one morning, eyes wide with certainty. Marie's heart clenched, both terrified that her children were imagining the impossible and desperate to believe that they were right. She did not tell them to stop. How could she? A part of her was ready to believe anything if it meant seeing him again. The town, gripped by the tension between skepticism and hope, became a stage for the impossible. Markets buzzed with speculation, church pews filled with whispered prayers, and windows were watched with unblinking eyes. Every step in the fog became a question, every shadow a possible answer. The village held its breath, waiting for the impossible to step into the light. And in the midst of it all, the soldier drew closer. He moved with care, avoiding notice, yet every day brought him nearer to the life he had been ripped from. The town's whispers, whether born of fear, superstition, or hope, were not mere imagination. They were premonitions of his return. Each story, each rumor, built the tension that would make his arrival impossible to ignore. The village that believed in ghosts was about to witness something far stranger, a miracle made real. The man they had mourned, declared dead and lost to history, was walking back into the streets, unseen yet inevitable. The line between life and legend was about to blur forever. 7 years. That was how long Marie had waited. 7 years of silence, of letters that never arrived, of hope fading only to flare again in quiet moments. Every day, she had checked the mailbox, fingers trembling, imagining his handwriting on a folded sheet of paper. Every day, it remained empty, and every day the ache in her chest grew heavier. She had written, too, letters filled with longing, despair, and the mundane details of life he had missed. She poured her heart onto paper, describing the children's milestones, the state of the village, and her own relentless grief. And then she had sent them, trusting the world to deliver her words to him. Some letters vanished in transit. Others were intercepted or lost in the chaos of war's end. Each missed message became another stitch in the fabric of their separation. The letters became a ritual of memory. She kept them carefully tucked in a box beneath her bed, reading them over and over, imagining that in some impossible way, he could feel them, could hear her voice across the miles and the years. The children sometimes watched her, puzzled by the intensity with which she cherished those scraps of paper. "Mama, will Papa write back?" they would ask. She would nod, her eyes misting, offering no answer she truly believed. The village, too, felt the weight of those lost letters. Friends whispered that perhaps he had survived somewhere far away, that the letters simply hadn't reached him. Some feared the worst, that he was trapped in some remote corner of the world, unable to communicate, his life a shadow of the one he had left behind. Every rumor, every fleeting hope, tied back to the letters that never arrived, a silent testament to the fragility of communication in a world torn by war. Each passing year hardened Marie in some ways and softened her in others. She became both patient and desperate, knowing that the world could be cruel but unwilling to surrender entirely to despair. The letters, even in their absence, were a bridge to a life that had not completely ended. They were proof that love persisted, even when reality seemed intent on erasing it. Then, on a gray afternoon when the mist rolled in from the river and the village seemed wrapped in silence, a messenger arrived with a note. It was not written in the familiar hand she had imagined, but it carried news that made her heart pound with disbelief. Her husband was alive. The letter was brief, fragmented, a whisper of hope that had survived years of loss. She pressed it to her chest, tears streaming down her face, the children gathering around her in silent wonder. The missed letters, the years of waiting, the absence that had become a life of its own, all of it led to this single, fragile moment. Marie understood then that love could endure separation, that hope could survive even the cruelest twists of fate. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the soldier who had been declared dead was walking closer to the life that had never forgotten him. The village, too, began to stir with anticipation. The whispers that had seemed like superstition now felt like prelude. People moved through the streets with a heightened awareness, watching for shadows in the fog, listening for footsteps that might carry the impossible. Every sound, every movement held the promise of revelation. 7 years of silence had forged a deep, aching hope. And now, as the fog shifted and the air grew electric with expectation, the world seemed to hold its breath. The letters that never came had kept a story alive, a story that was about to reach its unimaginable climax. The impossible reunion was near, and the echoes of lost words, missed messages, and unbroken love were ready to converge. It happened on a morning thick with fog, the kind that muffled sound and blurred the edges of reality. The soldier stepped quietly into the village, weary but determined, each step carrying the weight of 7 years lost. Every landmark he passed, the bakery, the old bridge, the chapel, stirred memories that both comforted and tormented him. He had walked countless miles, but these streets, familiar yet changed, held the pull of home stronger than any hunger or exhaustion. Marie was in the market, selecting vegetables for the day, when she first sensed it. A presence, subtle and yet undeniable, brushed against the edges of her awareness. She turned instinctively, heart pounding, and froze. There he was, the man she had mourned, imagined, and held in her heart through years of solitude. His face was weathered, his uniform tattered, but his eyes, their eyes, met hers, and the world fell away. Time seemed to slow. Around them, the villagers went about their daily routines, oblivious to the impossible reunion unfolding in their midst. Marie took a tentative step forward, disbelief warring with instinct. Could it truly be him? Could the war, the years of absence, the letters that never came, all have been undone by this single, miraculous moment? The soldier's eyes widened with recognition as well. The contours of her face, the curve of her shoulders, the way her hair fell in the morning light. It all spoke to a life he had never stopped longing for. He reached out, hands trembling, as if to prove to himself that she was real. And she did the same, closing the distance between them with a mixture of fear, hope, and overwhelming emotion. The children, drawn by the strange, electric energy between their parents, ran forward. The eldest clung to his father's leg, tears streaming down his face, while the younger ones peered with wide-eyed astonishment. Marie's hands pressed against the soldier's chest, feeling the rhythm of a heartbeat that had been absent yet survived through the years. The villagers, now noticing the reunion, gathered in hushed awe. Murmurs spread like wildfire. "It's him, he's alive." Some wept openly. Others crossed themselves, unable to comprehend the reality. The fog seemed to part slightly, as if the world itself was bending to witness the impossible. Marie could barely speak, each word caught in the tangle of disbelief and joy. She whispered fragments, names, and questions. You came back, we thought." Her voice broke, tears mingling with laughter. He held her tightly, answering only with the same trembling embrace, a silent confession of survival, endurance, and unending love. For a moment, the years of absence melted away. The war, the letters lost, the nights of despair, all of it dissolved in the warmth of reunion. The children clung to their father, touching him as though to confirm he was real, while Marie rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the solid proof of the life that had returned. And yet, the world beyond this reunion remained unchanged. Life, with all its complications, had continued during their separation. They had to rebuild, to reconnect, to bridge the chasm that 7 years had carved into their hearts. But for now, in this fog-laden morning, nothing else mattered. The soldier, declared dead but impossibly alive, had returned. The village, the family, the children, they were witnesses to a miracle that defied logic and history. The moment of recognition was not merely about seeing each other again. It was about reclaiming the years stolen by war, proving that love and endurance could survive even the cruelest of fates. In that embrace, the impossible became reality. The soldier who had been lost was home, and for the first time in 7 years, the family was whole again. The fog swirled around them, a silent witness to a story that would echo through the village for generations, a story of survival, hope, and the unbreakable bonds of love. The reunion brought joy, yes, but it also brought a tidal wave of emotions that none of them were prepared for. 7 years had changed everything. The children had grown, Marie had endured grief and responsibility alone, and the soldier carried the weight of unimaginable experiences. Love and relief collided with guilt, sorrow, and disbelief, creating a storm that threatened to overwhelm them all. At first, words failed. They clung to each other, hearts beating in a rhythm that had survived separation but now demanded understanding. The children stared, trying to reconcile the father they had imagined with the man before them. Scarred, weary, yet unmistakably the one they had never stopped loving. Their eyes, full of questions, mirrored the confusion in Marie's own. How do you embrace a man you have mourned for years? How do you forgive yourself for the life that went on in his absence? Marie had to confront the choices she had made, the moments she had endured alone. She had learned resilience, yes, but also the painful knowledge that life continues, even when the heart is broken. She had disciplined the children, carried the burdens of the household, and faced society's scrutiny, all while holding onto a fragile ember of hope. Now, she had to reconcile that strength with the vulnerability she felt in his presence. The soldier, too, faced his own reckoning. He carried memories of hardship that no one could understand. The hunger, the cold, the silent nights spent staring at the sky, wondering if he would ever return. These experiences had hardened him, yet also made him more acutely aware of the fragility of life and love. He had imagined this reunion countless times, but reality was heavier, more complex than memory had prepared him for. There were tears, so many tears, grief and joy entwined as they shared stories of absence and survival. The children clung to their father, seeking reassurance that he was real, while he listened to every word Marie had whispered during the years they were apart. Every anecdote, every struggle, every small victory of her endurance became part of the tapestry of their shared life, a testament to survival and resilience. The village watched, quietly reverent. They had witnessed miracles before only in stories, never in their own streets. Now, they saw a family confronting the impossible and emerging, not unscathed but whole in spirit. The emotional reckoning was as much for them as for the family. It was proof that life could bend, that hope could endure, and that human connection could survive even the most brutal separations. Slowly, they began to rebuild the bonds that time had strained. Laughter returned in hesitant bursts. Hands found one another, and routines that had once been disrupted by grief began to take shape again. Yet beneath the surface lay the scars of absence, a reminder that even miracles come with shadows. They had survived, but survival demanded reckoning, understanding, and patience. As the days passed, they learned to navigate their emotions, balancing the joy of reunion with the weight of what had been lost. The soldiers' stories of war and captivity became lessons for the children, reminders that life can be cruel and fragile, yet love endures. Marie, the pillar of strength throughout his absence, now leaned on him as much as he leaned on her. Together, they rebuilt a life that had been nearly stolen. And in that quiet, fragile balance, they discovered something profound. The human heart, even after years of suffering, can stretch to encompass joy, grief, hope, and love all at once. Their emotional reckoning was not an ending, but a beginning, a new chapter forged from loss, endurance, and the miraculous return of a man once declared dead. The years that followed were quieter, yet richer in a way that only survival could make possible. The soldier, Marie, and their children learned to live with the echoes of the past, but also to treasure the miracle of the present. Their story became one not of loss alone, but of endurance, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds that had carried them through unimaginable odds. The village, too, carried the imprint of their return. Neighbors who had once whispered in awe or fear now looked on with reverence. The tale of the soldier who had been declared dead and returned after 7 years became part of local lore, recounted by children at hearths, told by elders with quiet pride. It was proof that hope could survive the darkest of times, and that human courage could defy even history itself. For the children, the father they had longed for became a guide, a teacher, and a presence that reshaped their understanding of life. They learned firsthand about endurance, not just in the abstract, but in the real world, living example of someone who had survived the cruelest of separations. Every story he shared of the war, every tale of the long, lonely nights, became lessons etched into their hearts. Marie's life, too, transformed. She had endured grief, carried responsibilities alone, and faced the relentless weight of absence. Yet, her strength was validated not in survival alone, but in reunion. She and the soldier rebuilt their marriage slowly, carefully, and intentionally, discovering a love deepened by years of longing, patience, and unshakable devotion. The children witnessed this love and learned that even after immense suffering, relationships could heal, trust could return, and hearts could mend. The soldier, forever changed by captivity and isolation, became a figure of quiet resilience in the village. His experience forged empathy, patience, and wisdom. He spoke less, listened more, and valued the simple, ordinary moments that life offered. Family dinners, walks along the river, laughter echoing through the house, all became treasures. The years that could have broken him instead defined him, shaping a legacy not of war, but of survival, endurance, and love reclaimed. Together, they honored the past without being trapped by it. The house held memories, photographs, letters, and mementos, but it was also alive with new stories, new laughter, and new beginnings. The foggy mornings, once symbols of despair, now carried the promise of each new day. Every glance, every embrace, was a reminder that life, though cruel, could also deliver the impossible. Their story spread beyond Normandy, inspiring others who had faced the void of loss and separation. Letters arrived from distant towns, from people who had endured long waits, offering gratitude and sharing their own experiences. The soldier's return became a beacon of hope for those who had been abandoned by circumstance or misfortune, proof that miracles, however improbable, could happen. Even decades later, the family would recount the tale, not as a legend, but as truth. A truth forged in absence, tested by grief, and confirmed in reunion. The legacy they left behind was not just of survival, but of the human spirit's capacity to endure, to hope, and to reclaim what was almost lost. In the end, the soldier who had been declared dead became more than a figure in a miraculous story. He became a symbol, a reminder that love persists beyond war, beyond time, beyond despair. His return reshaped a family, a village, and the lives of all who heard the tale. 7 years lost, one impossible return, and a legacy that would echo through generations. Survival is not just living. It is enduring, loving, and returning to the life that never stopped waiting for you.